Rep Radio, an Emory production. Since 2009, our goal has been simple. We support, promote, engage, and inspire the arts community by igniting the ghost light that shines on the stages of the up-and-coming, the unsung heroes, the brilliant writers, and the dynamic designers. Our podcast breaks the fourth wall to give you an inside look at the plays and the players. Stay tuned. Rep Radio is on the air. Today on the podcast, I head over to Theater Exile to meet with director Matt Pfeiffer to talk about the production On the Exhale, the solo piece by Martine Zimmerman, featuring Sully Hullum. Here is my interview with director Matt Pfeiffer. Welcome to Rep Radio. I'm your host, Darnell Radford, and it wouldn't be a season if I didn't sit down and have a chat with Theater Exile. And so we're here to talk about the upcoming production On the Exhale, and it's starring Sully Hullum. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Matt, welcome back to Rep Radio.
Thank you,
I think it's been a minute since we chatted.
Yeah, I think it has. I don't remember the last time we actually talked, but it has been a while.
It's always some deep thought because that's what happens at Exile. We come here and, it's either not, it's 90 minutes or a little longer, but either way, it doesn't end when the curtain, at the curtain.
That's the hope.
The conversation continues as we walk out the door. Thanks to your PR for keeping me in the loop here. So tell me about On the Exhale.
Well, it's a one-woman play, and it centers on a woman who has experienced gun violence in a very specific way, and it's sort of her attempts to come to grips with what she's experienced and how to move forward. And so, I don't want to say, it's funny, I feel a little protective about giving too many plot details away, just because I think what's great about the play is it takes very unexpected turns. So it's very much a meditation on grief, but it also poses really poignant questions, I think, about gun violence and the gun debate, but also poses really risky propositions to an audience about what might happen to someone who experiences that kind of unimaginable tragedy. And so that's, I think, what Zimmerman has done in his writing is to take a subject that I would say we're largely numb to in a way. We have difficulty even having a basic conversation about the ramifications of these mass shootings. And it's not just the politics of it. There is it's unimaginable. I'm the father of a 3-year-old, and Sully is the mother of a 12-year-old, and there's not a day of rehearsal that goes by that we're not thinking about this in regards to our own children. I think the mass scale of these shootings, and the more unimaginable they've become, I think it's made it harder for us to even engage in meaningful discussion about how we feel about it. And so I do think that the play is smartly doing both those things. The play is political because in speaking about gun control at all, it's political. But the play also is good theater. It's a really good story, and it's, I think, a really compelling story and a slightly different point of view that I don't think has been exhausted either in popular fiction or in media. And so that's what made me compelled by it. I just felt like it presented a narrative I was not familiar with, even if all the surrounding material I was familiar with. School shootings and the like being something that is, I think since we've started rehearsal, there's been 2 mass shootings. So sadly, it's not a subject that ever gets irrelevant.
Yes, and that is unfortunate. And we, I think about this when I walk into a theater. I've said things before like, only in a theater can you lose your wallet and get it returned to you with everything that's supposed to be in it, you know?
Yeah.
So you start to think about safe spaces.
Yeah.
And there was just this sort of, I guess, this blind, there's this kind of ignorance to the thought that, oh, of course the school is safe.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
But then you think about, wow, television and real life have depicted walking through metal detectors, and you know, the news that comes out, like a kid showed up with a gun that was like their parents. They found it and brought it in, wanted to show and tell it, you know, and you start thinking it, and you're just like, how is it that 4 people show up in the country with traces of Ebola and we panic?
Yeah.
We go like ape over that. And, you know, kids get mowed down in schools, and it's thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. Well, I do think that there is historically, I mean, you know, we didn't need Hamilton to remind us of this, but there has historically been a mistrust of the government, and there's historically suspicion about who's in control of the government and what their motives are. And so I do understand that there are people that see the encroachment of restrictions on guns and the Second Amendment as being something that feels like a harbinger of worse to come from government overreach.
Yeah.
But being sensible about finding a response to this crisis that exists in some large part solely in our country, trying to reconcile the polarity between those two truths is something that we don't seem to be able to muster the courage or the wherewithal to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not smart enough to know why that is. And I would say that I don't think the play portends to be smart enough to know what that is. But I think the play is attempting to address what you just said, which is to put a real human face and a real experience on something that I think we seem, the fact that we can't collectively come to agreement that we should work in the same way to end Ebola, you know, or stop an Ebola outbreak, as to try and prevent as many guns being in the hands of people that shouldn't have them as possible.
Yeah.
And this common refrain of like, well, criminals don't care anyway. You know, people who want to get guns will get guns. I think that's applicable to all laws. You know, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't enforce our highest priorities, our highest morality. And again, this is a debate that goes back, you know, to the forming of the Constitution, that there are people that want to be careful about how the government will overreach, and that taking away guns is the first sign of a government that can't be kept in check.
Yeah.
And I wish that some people who felt that way, you know, were willing to have more meaningful conversation about how to, again, close the gap between that belief and the reality of what we're experiencing. And I don't know, you know, I mean, one could make the same argument about climate, you know, that it's the same disparity of, for whatever reason, holding on to this idea that there is a vast conspiracy of people who want to make money off of the idea that the earth is warming or cooling or changing its very fabric, instead of dealing with the reality of increasing climate disaster.
Yeah.
And so I do think part of our responsibility as theater artists in particular is, you know, as Tracy Letts, you know, famously said, you know, we get to say it to their face, you know, and so we in the theater, I think, bear a responsibility to put things on stage that, as you said about Theater Exile, provokes debate, provokes conversation, hopefully provokes people into thinking more critically about the world. And I think this play does that. I don't think the play in any way is providing an answer or a convenient solution. It's not attempting to make the impossible possible, but it is saying there is a cost. There is a cost to this violence. There's a cost to the pain that is inflicted on people. And that cost can go in ways that we don't always foresee.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that, you know, this is the kind of theatrical experience that allows people to live in the grief of these experiences, but also be provoked into, what the ramifications of this kind of violence really are.
Yeah. Do you think, in your opinion, we could ever get past the until it happens to you ism? Because, one person says, yeah, my vote doesn't count. Because that's one person.
Yes.
But 40,000 people say that their vote doesn't count, and now they're regretting not voting.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that again, this phrase that gets overused a lot, I think about, being politically correct. I think it's kind of a bastardized phrase, because what's underneath that is actually, have we become too empathetic? Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I think that's really, it's a code for political correctness' attempt to ask more empathy from you. Mm. And I guess I don't understand why creating a world that has more empathy is somehow a bad thing. Yeah. And I think to your point, it's sad that sometimes things only become actionable when they affect you, instead of being able to have empathy for somebody else's experience. And part of the nature of theater work is we have already decided that somebody else's story is worth telling. Mm-hmm. It's hard to be in this work and make this art without being empathetic, because you lead from, well, this is not my story, but I think it's worth telling even though it's not my story. I see connection to this person's story in my own life or my own experience. And the same for an audience. Hopefully an audience that comes has the same experience. Maybe it's not directly what they've encountered, but they relate to it. And so I don't know if people are capable of making radical change without being directly affected by it. What I will say is there are plenty of people in positions of power who have been directly affected by this violence. That shooting at the political softball game. Steve Scalise.
In hell would I have been shot at a softball game.
And
still riding on the side of, but I don't think anything should be done about this.
If we had guns, we'd be okay.
We'll send in 3 more dudes over here to come.
So I don't know. I do think that it is. I think until people understand that that money is the ultimate answer to a lot of these debates, and I think you're starting to see that attrition. The NRA, I think last year reported their first real year of loss. Yeah. And it's not dissimilar. If the customer's always right, if people feel more pressure or more, people who have a greater relationship to they're responsible gun owners. There are people that I know in my own life who I believe own guns and also think that you should have to get a license and you should have to go through the same basic process you would get to driving a car, which is also in the wrong hands an implement of death.
And without running their mouths, they'd be the first ones to go get it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
To make sure that they're compliant. And
that's
it's like,
right.
You know what? I want to keep this, so I got to go pay $18 to go get this thing. Fine, it's not a problem. I would do that. Apparently, they're doing a thing where they'll give me the license now.
Yes. Yeah.
Just to make sure we're all in here.
I don't know. To your main question of until it happens to meism, I don't know. I want to live in a world where I think that people can get to that place, but I think there's that tweet that gets shared a lot. Once we were okay with kids in an elementary school getting gunned down, it's hard to sort of walk back from that. Once that's not enough, it's hard to know what is enough. And so what I just live in hope that generation after generation learns by attrition. I think the same is probably true with the climate. That I don't know that in our lifetime we will see the meaningful change we seek, but I hope that in my son's lifetime he'll see that change. And so again, I don't think that this play we're doing is intended to be, a political piece of theater. I do think it's a human story. I do think that it is a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end, and it tells a complete experience that, like I said, I think has as much to do with grief as it does with meaningful gun legislation or proposing action on these mass shootings. So I do hope that the audience that comes is, marketing the show has been really difficult because we want to be careful to not scare people off that the evening is either too sad or that the evening is just preaching to the choir. I don't think it is. I think the character in the play goes to some places that a really firm anti-gun person would be ashamed of and would be shocked by. So in the same way that I think someone who is really massively pro-gun or pro Second Amendment, no considerations after that would I think be engaged by some of the psychology that the character goes through. So I don't know that we will get that diverse of an audience. I do think there will be some people that assume because it's a theater piece, it's probably going to just be offensive to them because it will say guns are bad, and I'm here to say that I think the play has more dynamic than that. Yeah. In the same way that people that would come to, essentially have their truths affirmed might be shocked by some of the things that are in the play. Yeah. So my hope is that people are intrigued to engage with this subject in a more nuanced way, in a different way. Yeah, that's my hope.
Well, the description already leads to saying you can kind of assume that we're going to walk out of here saying it's gray.
It's gray, yeah.
Because it already leads with liberal college professor.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, so we already know the position of this professor.
Yes, that's right.
Then shit gets real.
Yes.
And now all of that comes into question.
That's right.
And you start to think differently.
Yeah.
And I think, I feel like a lot of it is kind of ignorance too when we're talking about, do you even know what the Second Amendment is?
For sure.
For sure. So it's like, so a lot of people are like, I have the right to bear arms, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
and then they just leave it at that and say like that's such a generic, blanketed statement.
Anything in regards to the founding of the country, the more sacrosanct, the lack of introspection over what the intention of these laws were and how we interpret them as a modern society. Yeah, I always feel like it's when you were able to couch America as the great experiment. Part of what I think you're doing in couching America in that way is to say it's an ongoing experiment. Yeah. I think that when it comes to capitalism, it's easy to say there's no question that capitalism is the winner and leader in the clubhouse over how to make money. Yeah. It's not necessarily a model for building a society. Mm-hmm. I think you can make an argument that democracy is still the most compelling and effective way to build a society. But we're still trying to figure that out. And every passing generation inherits the debts of the previous one, and every passing generation comes to new understandings of how the world might want to work. And I think it goes without saying that if Thomas Jefferson had any concept of the way an automatic weapon functioned, he might think differently about how citizens should arm themselves. And there may be somebody who argues who would willingly argue the opposite of that. That I can't. I don't know that I'm smart enough to speak to that. But I do think I understand that to provoke people to think more critically about the ramifications of what these weapons can do to a person, a community, a country. It's clear to me that has not been given enough thought because after something like Sandy Hook, we haven't taken any meaningful steps to change that debate, to change that conversation. Yeah. So I mean, just not being a gun owner, I could think of like a million things I would do to safely own a gun. Yes. It's like, okay, so if I'm a member of a range, is there a locker I can rent? That's to right. Leave it here? Because this is the only place I'm going to use it. That's right. So I would gladly pay a membership that allows me to leave it here. Yeah. Well, often what's brought into this debate is how one wants to protect their home. I mean, this is the idea of arming teachers comes from the same place. And, there's again, it's kind of the beauty of working in theater, right, where we conjecture about we create dramatic circumstances that allow an audience to imagine themselves in those circumstances. And I think most of us, I certainly grew up playing, guns and G.I. Joe in my backyard, and I certainly imagined myself as the sniper in the tree, and I imagined myself as a guy who could handle a gun. And when I was in Boy Scouts, I got my rifle and shotgun merit badge, and I learned how to shoot. And of course, I want to imagine that that I'm capable of. Sorry, I don't know how to interrupt this interview and just say you have to go out that side door. Sorry, like trying to wave here.
Show must go on.
Leave it in. You just this is live, baby. But that's just to say that I learned how to shoot a gun. I had a fascination, with the movie in my mind, the cartoon in my mind, where I got to be the hero, and even still, I probably have those. I can watch Taken and imagine myself in those circumstances.
I never had a thought. I always thought Jason Bourne was badass.
Yeah, I mean, but the reality is that even the most. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, trained, well-meaning police officers who panic and don't exactly know how to handle a certain situation. And people don't really know until they're in those circumstances what they would do. Yeah. And so to me, the minute people conjecture about a teacher with a gun or a good guy with a gun, I don't know that life plays out the way it does in a fictional story. And we have kind of convinced ourselves, or I shouldn't say we, I think a lot of people convince themselves that in that moment, if someone breaks into their house, they're going to know how to take them out. They're going to know how to stop them. Yeah. And
And what privilege do you come from? How large is your house?
Yes.
I mean, so I kind of make this joke. Sometimes I sit in the living room and I say, how do I get a camera to move through this space?
Sure.
Because I'm always thinking about television. How we view rooms, and I'm saying how do they get a camera to move through here and still feel like a nice homely space? Yeah. But then I'm thinking about here in Philadelphia, these row homes don't have much space. Yeah. So if you're coming down the stairs with your gun because someone broke in your door that's literally 3 steps from your flight of stairs, you're gonna get shot first.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is because I just think that imaginative fascination with assuming the causality, and the results seems to me to be a fruitless experiment. I don't think maybe my point is I don't think it's evidence that means unfiltered, unilateral, open carry is some kind of panacea to save you and your family in the way that we have imagined it in our minds. And I think that, again, oddly, the play brings us, I think on the Exhale brings you to that moment of confrontation of what would one do with this same gun in their hands. Yeah. And so I hope that as a piece of theater, that for people who want to engage with it, it's a chance to, again, think more critically and engage with an emotional set of circumstances that we would not wish on anyone, which is to experience tragic loss in a way that alters your emotional chemistry and alters your life. And I think that's what Martin Zimmerman's trying to do with the play is confront the physical reality of gun ownership and the emotional toll of gun violence. I think is the heart of the play.
Yeah. I was going to ask about if you could speak directly to the legislature. Yeah. What would you say?
I guess I would want to say that to ignore what's happening, it's like trying to put duct tape over your mouth when you're going to vomit. That shit finds a place to come out. You can't. That's not a. You have to deal with the fact that there's a problem, and I think there's a cognitive dissonance when it comes to what has allowed these incidents to occur, And people can talk about mental health, and they can talk about violent video games, and these issues are true the world over. These are not unique to the United States. What's unique to the United States is the access to the guns and the reality of the sheer number of mass shootings we experience. And it's the same when people want to bring up, what about Chicago? It's like people who want to talk about gang violence and the drug economy of poor cities, that's a very different conversation than the reality of mass shootings. And to conflate them is intellectually dishonest, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So what I would want to say is, I think that when you have hemorrhaging the way that we do with mass shootings, to try and conflate it to a failing of mental health, to try and conflate it to a failing of the entertainment industry, to try and conflate it to a failing of gang violence, is all hyperbole that just takes you further and further away from the truth, which is that easy access for domestic abusers, people with a violent history, people with emotional distress history, should be ended. There should be a very basic, easy way to address a way to protect the Second Amendment and say a law-abiding, lawful citizen who passes a background check and has a license is not treading on the Constitution. It's not an affront to our freedom. It is a basic agreement with us as a society to address this issue. And that's what I would say to the legislature is making an effort to a common sense gun control at the risk of offending people who don't want to acknowledge there's a problem. I just don't see how that math works out.
It's required to get behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah.
It is required to get into a space that is 21 and up.
Yep.
It is required to
operate heavy machinery. I mean, like
everything.
Take your pick.
We have a lot of things require us to have license. Like you can't get so many jobs without various certifications.
Right. And someone signed, I mean, like, you have to get a doctor's note to say that you're of sound mind and body to operate a vehicle.
Yes.
Like, you have to go to a doctor. And everyone just does that. No one thinks it's a violation of their privacy. Everyone understands that that's a basic consideration for how to behave on the road. And I don't know. I don't know why it's such an offense for someone who wants to own a gun to be required with the same things. And again, I think most gun owners that I know would be perfectly happy to do that.
Yeah.
But that's why I go back to the money. When you have, the NRA is a very successful lobbying institution, one of the most successful. And there are a lot of politicians who, they've helped get elected and put their resources behind. And, when you're in the pocket of somebody, you're in the pocket of somebody. And I don't want to be that cynical about the way our democracy works, but I think that, Citizens United did a number on this country, and it allowed politicians to be bought by all sorts of entities that did not have the interest of the democracy in mind.
Yeah.
So
I feel like I drew a blank on it.
That's right. I mean, we're getting into the weighty issues of life in the 21st century. Yeah. And we are living. I mean, that's why I keep stressing this. I mean, we are living in this moment of great divide in the country. And I don't think this play is seeking to cause more division. I do think it is a play that is seeking to create more empathy and for people to think about the human toll of this kind of violence, which is something that we don't often want to engage with because it's more convenient for us to shut it out. And I include myself in that. I mean, part of saying yes to this play, part of my interest in the play was to actually force myself to be in the circumstances of someone who has survived this kind of incident. Because I get an alert on my phone that says X amount of people have been killed at, office or movie theater or school, and I'm sad and it troubles me, and then I move on. Yeah. And we've all kind of just collectively done that, and I think it's funny, numbness comes up a lot in the play, and the way the characters seeking to reverse that numbness often gets, I think, very traumatic. And I think that's kind of where we're at as a society. I think we've reached a place where we're numb to this kind of experience, and we don't know meaningfully move on from it.
Yeah.
So
So there are a couple of discussions that are part of the run
yeah,
on the 8th and the 12th, and you've partnered with the Anti-Violence Partnership of Philadelphia.
yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it felt like it was the kind of play that was going to spark debate and maybe even cause some distress for people who would come to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like the responsible thing to do to try and, partner with an organization that had some experience and relationship to helping people who experience trauma and navigating not just mental well-being, but also physical well-being, and are mindful of how how neighborhoods are engaging with violence. It just felt like it wasn't enough for us just to be putting on the play. It felt like we needed to be creating a resource for our audiences to have after the show is over, whether that was because of the immediate feelings they might have or because of the long-term feelings they might have. And the anti-violence organization is I think, exemplary in their ability to connect people and communities and create meaningful dialogue around some of these issues in ways that the play and we as a theater are not capable of. But, we have done a number of plays in our history that touch on traumatic incidences, from abuse to suicide, and we have not. I don't think we've always been overly responsible about taking care of our audience, and I think we're trying as an organization to get better at that and be mindful that sometimes we'll put things on stage that cause distress, and we want to be able to partner with someone who has the capacity for addressing some of that distress in a way that we cannot, and also to educate ourselves, to be talking with professionals and people that are engaged with this kind of trauma on a more daily basis than we are as theater makers.
Yeah. The production is on the Exhale. It is written by Martine Zimmerman. It is on stage. If you're listening to this, you can get tickets now through December 22nd.
Yes.
At Theater Exile, Theater RE, exile.org. And it features stars.
Yes. Well, I was going to say that I shouldn't bury the lead. I mean, all the things we've talked about in terms of gun violence and the politicization, the politics of gun violence. Just as someone who likes the theater, Sully Holm was one of the best actors in the city. I mean, for anybody who just saw Dance Nation, got to experience that firsthand. And she's authoring a tour de force performance. I mean, the show is 75 minutes, and it's not a long night, but it is, I think, a chance to see an actor give a kind of performance that we don't always get to see. So I do think that anybody who's made it this far in the podcast,
you're still with us, right?
It is, that to me, regardless of how you feel about the subject matter, regardless of how you feel politically, just from a pure theater craft standpoint and acting craft, you will not see a more compelling and exciting performance by anybody else. That's I don't know how many other one-person shows there are this season, but she's a damn good actor, and we're lucky. I'm lucky to be collaborating with her, and we're lucky to have her. And I feel like when I came into this city as an actor in 1999, Sully, as a founding member of Pig Iron, was one of the best actors working in the city, and she's gone on to be on stages in New York and all over the world. And the fact that she's been back in our community and doing meaningful work for the last couple of years, I think it's a gift to this community, and this is a great showcase of what she does. So I hope that that's something that will get people out.
Yes.
So just to make sure, I was like, wow, we're coming to the end, and I should make sure I say that, because regardless, Martine's work is really great. I think he's an exceptional playwright, and I think his take on this is pretty unique. But Sully is a gift to the community. So I hope that people will come check her out.
Yeah. come see Philadelphia treasure Suli Holum
Yes.
tackle this very relevant piece on the Exhale by Martine Zimmerman, directed by Matt Pfeiffer.
That was a good plug. That was good. That was good.
Tickets, Theater Exile, theaterexile.org. Get 2 or more, because theater is more fun with a +1. Matt, it's always a pleasure to sit and talk with you and to break down or begin these conversations, because this is the beginning. We experience the work, and then we continue the conversation on our way out the door, down the street, on the subway, in the car, next day at work at the water cooler, a few days down the road when we tell other people to come see the show. Try to squeeze in for a post-discussion, be a part of that conversation. And, we'll put a link to the Anti-Violence Partnership of Philadelphia as well, just to have all the right information. Because no matter where you are in this situation, wherever you are on this topic of discussion, being a part of the conversation is necessary, and understanding all these points of view help us reach a better position of clarity. And figuring out how to be in this world with everyone, and having all this factored in is really helpful. So, Matt, thank you for chatting with us today, and we will see you in the theater.
Thank you.
All right. It's always a pleasure.
Rep Radio continues to be inspired by our community and listeners like you. We are proud to be an Emory production. Visit us online at em3ry.com. Ride with us. Emory is on the move.